Welcome back to Behavioral Science for Brands, a podcast where Richard Schotten and I go deep into behavioral science, trying to find practical applications for marketers and agencies. Our mission, our unofficial mission, has been to find ways that marketers can use behavioral science to grow their brands. Specifically taking what we've seen work so well in the United Kingdom and Europe and bring it into the American market. Today, we're talking Liquid Death, an amazing new brand here in America. And we're going to dive deep into the brand's past and also talk about the behavioral science that's powering it. So we're going to talk skulls, bad reviews, and the importance of being distinctive. Let's get into it. So Richard, Liquid Death is created just a few years ago. It's 2017, and the founder, Mike Cesario, is actually an art director at an ad agency, and he comes up with the idea that the bottled water market has really been undisrupted. It's really all very similar, and at least in the American advertising community, it's almost like a joke. If you can sell a bottle of water, you can sell anything, right? Because the product inside the packaging is always going to be within degrees the same thing. You're selling bottled water. So they come up with the idea for Liquid Death to be almost an irreverent opposite of the entire industry. And in trying to be so distinct, they create a real sensation of a brand. Really, I think you could say it's a creative-led brand that's really taken the industry's kind of become a darling of the industry because it's been so bold in how irreverent it is, and it's been so exciting.
I think it's an amazing brand, and you've flagged up how distinctive it is, and I think that's really crucial to its success. The bottled water market, each different brand in the market, follows a very similar pattern. It's all about nature. It's all about Purity, yes. And they have completely deviated from that. So, some of the ads have headless axemen running around, murdering people's thirst, murdering them, in fact. And that taps into one of the oldest behavioral science biases. There's experimentation back from 1933 by a German psychologist called Hedwig von Restorff. And when she was at the University of Berlin, she ran a series of studies which essentially showed we are hardwired to notice what's distinctive. So, broad principle is if I read out a list of words and say there are 10 words on this list, and 9 of them are items of furniture, and 1 of them is an animal, when I ask you later what you're going to remember, you're going to remember the animal, exactly. But I take another person, read out 10 words, and 9 of them are animals, and 1 of them is a piece of furniture.
I'm going to remember the piece of furniture.
Exactly. It's not the furniture or the animal per se, it's what it's surrounded by. We notice things that are distinctive. So as a marketer, what you should be thinking is, what are my category conventions? In this case, naturalness, alpine scenes, beauty and whatever. And think, well, which of those conventions do I have to adhere to? And which are there for just tradition's sake? And it's those conventions that are just there for tradition's sake that you should think about breaking. Because if you do, Liquid Death do this radically, you are going to be much, much more noticeable, much more memorable.
Now, I've heard you share this with clients. We've talked about it, that you should look at the category conventions, know which one to break and which ones not to break. Arguably, Liquid Death has broken some that many would have said should never be broken.
Well, maybe, but what they talk about is saying, well, if you stop 100 people on the street and ask them, what benefit does water deliver? They will say it's refreshing. So you don't need to tell them that. Absolutely, all those other brands thought that you had to emphasize refreshingness. But people aren't stupid. They know that's what water delivers.
Right.
So Liquid Death have seen absolutely that message is unnecessary. instead focus on humor, instead focus on being wildly disruptive.
And I think what's so interesting about Liquid Death is outside of this wild creative that they have, underneath it is this layer of quality that I think people are really looking for. It's sourced from the Austrian Alps. It uses 100% aluminum can, so there's no plastic in the production of the bottle. I mean, these are things that people care about today. So you get both this kind of revolt of the category conventions, and then on things that folks really care about, like sustainability, like high quality product inside, they're still delivering on that, even if it's not the focus of their advertising.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's the key here, isn't it? It's the distinctiveness of the advertising that I think is so powerful. That's what makes it memorable. Now, you then have a question of, well, how do you decide how to behave? How do you decide the conventions that you're going to break? And what I think Liquid Death have done so interestingly is, rather than break conventions haphazardly, they've picked the conventions of a very different category, something like craft beer.
Yeah.
If you saw a craft beer behave in the way that they do,
you would say not so distinctive.
No, it would be interchangeable. So maybe that's a lesson that marketers can take. Identify a different category, think about the conventions they have, and then take those conventions and force fit them onto your brand. And that might be a really good way of sparking ideas for what to do. And because it gives you a framework,
yes,
it allows you to be consistent.
Yeah.
And consistency is hugely important.
So I love that as you think about the communications that you want to layer on top of a brand. And I think the other thing I'd like to add to what you're saying is, we still, as we develop brands today, the product itself has to be of high quality. It's almost a barrier to entry. If Liquid Death did not taste as good as its competitors, or if it didn't have some of the environmental angle, my belief is it wouldn't be growing as fast as it is. So I think you have this you've got to do a bare minimum, which is still a very high bar, and then you have to disrupt, or you have to be distinctive.
Yeah, if your product's awful, advertising is going to save you. You know, the most memorable ad just tells people quicker that the product's awful. So I think that's absolutely fair. One of the other bits that I mentioned was the consistency of their distinctiveness. And that's important. There's a long-standing idea in behavioral science called the mere exposure effect. First study goes back to 1968, and an American Polish psychologist called Robert Zając. And he recruited a group of people. He shows them pictures of faces and asks people to rate how good looking they think those faces are. And he does this for, let's say, an hour. It's a long study. What he doesn't tell people is that he repeats some of the faces. So I might see one person once, another person's face twice, another person's face 5 times, 10 times, 25 times. And what he shows is that the ratings of handsomeness go up with frequency. So if I've seen a face loads of time, I'm more likely to rate it highly. He called this the mere exposure effect. And the reason he says mere is no extra information is being given about this person. It's simply the effect of frequency that drives appreciation. So in his kind of experiment, rather than frequency breeding contempt, it breeds commitment or contentment. We appreciate things more if we've seen them multiple times. That's not a one-off finding. He does exactly the same things with Turkish words and Chinese characters. And he runs this amongst American students, so none of them speak Turkish, none of them speak Chinese. Again, if people see words multiple times, they're more likely to assume they have a positive meaning. So what's so good about Liquid Death is they're not just randomly breaking category conventions. They are behaving like a death metal band, but they're behaving like a beer brand. And therefore, it gives them a degree of consistency. And it's the consistency that improves people's liking.
Richard, something that comes to mind for me is that as American brands continue to be so competitive, we see CMOs, I think the last report is they stay in their job generally 18 to 24 months. So you bring a new CMO in, it's a very short-term stint, and the expectation is, what are you going to do for the brand? Let's make an impact, let's make a change, do your best to grow the brand. But this idea that you're explaining might make the argument it's better to not make massive changes. The mere effect of having the same creative in market or the same messages really helps grow likability, grow acceptance over time.
Absolutely. I think the question it raises is good for who? So for the brand, absolutely. We chop and change far too much. So there's a famous political strategist in Britain. He was the right-hand man of Tony Blair, Alistair Campbell, and he famously said something along the lines of, by the time that you, as a political strategist, are feeling absolutely sick to death with boredom at the repetition of your message, that's the time it's finally entering public consciousness. So don't be seduced by the novelty of change. Instead, think about repeating messages again and again. Consistency is crucial.
Smart. Maybe it's my American upbringing, or maybe it's being an employer. The other thing that you could take away from this natural tension is that it's really the employer and the brand's job to make sure that we all succeed when the brand succeeds. So aligning successes and aligning economic incentive to the brand's health. Make sure that even if I'm the CMO that doesn't do a new campaign, but I'm the CMO that stewards good, healthy growth, that we all win from it. And I think that's a message for owners. It's a message for brand leaders, because it goes from the CMO and the C-suite all the way down to the junior employee. Everybody feels they need to revolutionize to make their mark and be successful, when really, as owners and as brand leaders, we want the brand to come first.
I like that. And I think that feels a bit more pragmatic and realistic than my plea to altruism. So let's go for that. Alignment of economic interest.
I think we can look at all the angles, but we can't be naive to think that we're not going to, your job's not safe if you don't change the campaign. But that may not be what's best for the brand. We can't live in that.
No, I think that's fair. I think that's fair.
Yeah. Well, let's take a break now, and when we come back, we're going to talk about some more disruptive work that Liquid Death has really pioneered that's led to great effect for them.
Behavioral Science for Brands is brought to you by Function Growth, Ad Age's Newcomer Agency of the Year. Function Growth uses behavioral science to supercharge growth for direct-to-consumer brands. Delivering a wide spectrum of services, they are the one-stop shop for brands with high growth potential. Tired of agencies that make money when you don't? Function Growth's shared risk and reward model means they only make money when your brand grows. Discover how Function Growth can unlock the power of behavioral science to accelerate growth for your brand today.
Welcome back to Behavioral Science for Brands. Richard and I have been talking about Liquid Death, a very exciting brand on a massive growth trajectory. In 2022, they doubled their sales from 100 million cans to 200 million cans. They're the number one bottled water on Amazon, number two sparkling water on Amazon in the US. This is a brand that's got a lot of traction and a lot of trajectory right now. And during the break, we flipped on one of their campaigns that just makes such an impact, which is their Greatest Hate, volumes 1, 2, and now in volume 3. This is them taking all of the comments that they receive on social media that are negative and playing them to heavy metal music. And the campaign has generated 1 billion PR hits. It has 10 million times been viewed on YouTube and 1 million social media engagements.
10 sassy songs with lyrics taken straight from real hate comments you won't be able to get out of your head. Really feel the hate with chart toppers like Worst Name for a Water Company.
Worst name for a water company ever.
And It's Dumb and I Won't Buy It.
It's dumb and I won't buy it.
This is a big campaign to big effect. Again, doing something totally distinctive, highlighting these detractors.
Absolutely. As you say, first of all, I think it works because it's distinctive. Most ads brag. Most ads tell you about how amazing a brand is. So this is certainly distinctive. It's going to be memorable. It's going to get cut through. But there's also something else going on, and it's a tactic that's been used a few times by brands, which is they think, well, if I emphasize that some people hate me, people sometimes assume, well, if it's hated by some people, it's going to be loved by others. There's a lovely example in Britain of a comedian called Stuart Lee who does this. So his comedy is very much aimed at people who are left-wing. So it'd be the kind of Bernie Sanders end of the Democrat Party. And in Britain, we have lots of national newspapers and they go across the political spectrum. So what Stuart Lee does is, of course, he takes comments from people like The Guardian, which is a very left-wing paper, and it will say, you know, the guy's a genius. So far, so normal.
Right.
What he also does is take comments from the right-wing press, which are much more negative.
Sure.
So one that always sticks in my mind, there's a columnist in the Daily Mail called Jan Moore, who wrote something like he was a slime pit of bitterness. And he runs this on his posters. And the reason he's doing that is he knows that your left-leaning people will be interested in positive praise from the Guardian,
left. Yep.
from the left.
Mhm.
But in this polarised world, what he's very astutely tapping into is he knows if a left-leaning person sees a right-wing paper virulently attacking it, they must think, well, I love
Pretty
stuff.
good too.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
right-wing hate. And that, I think, is interesting, of recognising that people have this rule of thumb that you can't be all things to all people. So if you can set yourself up as in opposition to something else and then talk about how that other group dislikes you, thinks you're crap, well, you're onto something quite powerful there and something quite distinctive.
So that's one way you can play this idea out.
Yeah.
Another way you can play it out is in our episode on The Economist, we talked about the genius of some of their ads being that when you undid the puzzle, you recognized your own genius
Yeah.
in The Economist ads. Can you remind everybody how that went?
Yeah, there's a I think it's 1978, but there's a study from Graf and Slamecka,
Yes.
University of Toronto, and they came up with an idea called the generation effect. So in their study, what they basically do is give people some lists of words and ask them what they can remember. Other people get incomplete words. So first group might have fish, cat, dog. Next group might have F blank SH, D blank G, CA blank. Both groups are asked to recall those words at a later date. And the key finding is that the second group, the people who had to generate the answer themselves, they remember about, I think it's 10 to 15% more.
Those that did some work.
Those that did some work, those that had to go through some mental processing, those that generated the answer, they are more likely to remember the words. So that became known as the generation effect. And what some really clever advertisers do, like The Economist, is rather than tell you you'll be a failure unless you read The Economist, they set a minor word puzzle. The classic ad was, I don't read The Economist, management trainee, age 42. Same message, but it relies on the audience to solve the puzzle, and it's that act of effort that embeds it in people's minds.
I think the example that you gave of the management trainee,
Yeah.
age 42, connects with the idea of what Liquid Death is doing, in that I see the other side and I'm glad it's not me. I recognize that I'm in the other group, and by creating that separation, it creates adherence to the ad or adherence to the product.
Yeah, I mean, there is some fascinating work around like in and out groups. And I think one of the famous studies, and I struggle to remember the name of the academic.
Put it in the show notes.
We'll put it in the show, so I'll find it later. But he basically recruits a group of Man United fans. So this is a big, massive football team, and tells them that they're going to be watching videos of football games. They've got to spot the fouls or something along those lines. There's a little bit of subterfuge. Really what they're doing is, when they tell those participants that they have to go across campus to find the video room, as those participants are walking, a colleague of the psychologist runs past the participant and falls over. And the experiment is how many people help the stranger. The twist in the experiment is sometimes they wear a Liverpool top, Liverpool FCs. This is another football club, main enemy of Man United. Sometimes they wear an unbranded sports top, and sometimes they're wearing a Man United top.
Manchester,
And what they show is if someone is wearing a Manchester United top and they fall over, Manchester United fan, much more likely to help. But if they are from another group, Liverpool fans, even an unbranded sportswear, much less likely to help. So the argument there that I think you could apply to brands maybe is if you can create a sense that you are part of a tribe, part of a group, you can get people to respond far more positively. Now that might all feel a bit abstract and academic, but think about what Apple did in those classic ads. The really early ones, which were about we're here for the troublemakers, the rule breakers, the square pegs in the round holes. They are setting Apple up as for creative rule breakers, other products for the sheep who follow the rules. That to me is applying this idea of in and out groups.
Yes.
And I think it's something that more brands can probably apply.
And I do think that's what's going on in the Liquid Death example. When you see this irreverent attitude, there's going to be a mass of people who just want to buy their water brand and they don't care what brand they buy. But for those that can connect with that irreverence, I think they're in that group and they really love the mocking of the
straight-laced.
infomercials.
Yeah.
I think that to them really makes a connection.
Yeah, I hadn't looked at that perspective. I think you're right. It's a group who define themselves maybe as sophisticated to know that this is a joke, that they're in on it, and to realise that all that overblown nonsense about naturalness is maybe just a bit cliched.
And I think the joke extends to the product usage as well. When you hold and drink a Liquid Death can, it looks like you're drinking a beer in public.
It's in a tall boy, isn't it?
It's in a tall boy. Yeah. It just feels not like a bottle of water. And so I think the brand's consistent in its marketing and advertising and in its product that is really compelling.
Absolutely. The only one people might want to be a little bit wary of is when you're in store, there are some studies that suggest people can almost become blind to brands that don't meet their expectations.
A blind as in they don't see it when they walk down the aisle.
So you're looking for a bottled water and you're just thinking, where's the see-through plastic bowl? You might just walk past the tall boy. Now they have, I think, successfully avoided that problem through the sheer power of maybe their advertising and brand, but it is a genuine risk for convention at point of sale.
And it may be a limitation that the brand either will have to address or never address. Dasani Water, one of the largest bottled water companies in America, sells 1 billion bottles of water. So we're talking about them being 5 times larger than Liquid Death. Poland Spring, I think, is 700 or 800 million bottles of water. So we're really talking about Liquid Death, while it has massive growth, being much smaller than the industry leaders. So how do you get to become an industry leader if that's your goal?
Yeah, fair point.
Yeah. And so not being able to be seen on the shelf, or the majority of people not being able to buy into this countercultural creative, may keep it a niche brand, but a very profitable, very successful niche brand.
And I love we're describing it as a niche brand. The latest figures I saw said it was worth 700 million. So I think most of us would be happy.
But in a category that's many tens of billions, it could be it's got a big opportunity and it could do really great where it is. Richard, as we always come to a close, we want to ask to wrap up the episode and make sure we all have the right takeaways. Could you do it for us?
Yeah, of course. So 3 big findings I think we've discussed today. The first is the power of being distinctive. We are hardwired to notice what's distinctive. So identify your category conventions and then think which ones you can break. And if you do that, you're getting over one of the biggest hurdles, which is simple notability. So think about the power of distinctiveness. But also think around consistency. So be distinctive from your competitors, but be consistent with your own approach. Liquid Death do that brilliantly. They take the norms of behaviour of a beer, the norms of behaviour of a death metal band, and they apply those consistently in their communications. And the mere exposure effect, that Zajanc experiment, suggests that by repeating the same basic approach over time, you become more preferable. And then finally, maybe there is an upside of not trying to be all things to all people. We're as interested as much in what people we admire say as what people we don't like say.
Yeah.
And we do the opposite of what the people we don't like say. So think about sometimes using that to your benefit. Who's your enemy, and how can you harness their hatred for your brand to your benefit?
And the extension that we talked about, how can you create tribes, even if it's not based on hatred? How can you create tribes to grow the affinity to your brand?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Richard, thanks as always for a really interesting discussion. For those listening, drop a comment, reach out to us. We're always looking for new and interesting behavioral science topics to cover. We always like to end with an interesting question. I have no connection to heavy metal, but to rock and roll I can do. Do you have a rock and roll artist that you most connect with, and why?
So I'm definitely with you on heavy metal as a genre. I struggle.
Have not access.
Yeah. I would say probably David Bowie, probably my favourite artist, I would say.
And is there a reason, just growing up listening?
Just growing up listening, things like Hunky Dory, all those Ziggy Stardust albums, I just thought they were brilliant.
Yeah.
Yourself?
Eric Clapton. And growing up, my dad listened to Eric Clapton, and to me, it's just like that classic guitar playing rock and roll. You can't lose.
Slow Hand himself.
Himself. Until next time, I'm Michael Aaron Flicker.
And I'm Richard Shotton.